I never imagined that watching my own sister get married would become the day I learned what real evil looks like in a designer tuxedo. It happened at the most lavish wedding ceremony Millbrook had ever seen, with 500 guests, imported orchids from Thailand, and a string quartet that cost more than most people's cars. What was supposed to be the fairy tale ending to my sister's perfect love story turned into a nightmare that shattered everything we thought we knew about the man she was about to call her husband. All because my 8-year-old daughter Lily refused to stay quiet when she witnessed something that would haunt us all forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Rebecca, and I'm 32 years old. I've been a single mother for 6 years now, ever since my ex-husband decided that responsibility wasn't for him and disappeared into the night like smoke. Lily is my whole world. Brilliant, fearless, and cursed with the kind of honesty that makes adults squirm. She sees through people's masks in a way that's both beautiful and terrifying. To most of my family, especially my mother, I'm the cautionary tale, the daughter who made all the wrong choices and ended up struggling to make ends meet while raising a child alone. But Lily? She's never been just another kid to me. She's my partner in this messy, beautiful life we've built together. She's the one who notices when the grocery store clerk looks sad and asks if they're okay. She's the one who gives her lunch money to the homeless man outside our apartment building. She's pure goodness in a world that often isn't, and that goodness was about to save my sister from making the biggest mistake of her life. My sister Victoria has always been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, she's everything my mother dreamed of having in a daughter. Elegant, successful, and engaged to a man who seemed too perfect to be real. Marcus Whitmore was a dream on paper. A successful architect from one of Millbrook's oldest families, charming enough to make grandmothers blush, and wealthy enough to afford the kind of wedding that gets featured in magazines. He swept Victoria off her feet with grand gestures, expensive gifts, and promises of a life most women only fantasize about. Everyone loved Marcus. My mother practically worshipped him, constantly bragging to her friends about her future son-in-law's accomplishments and family connections. Even I had to admit, he seemed perfect for Victoria. He was attentive, romantic, and treated her like a princess. When he proposed to her on New Year's Eve with a ring that probably cost more than I make in 3 years, the whole family celebrated like we'd won the lottery. The wedding planning took over our lives for 8 months. Victoria became consumed with creating the perfect day, and Marcus seemed to encourage every elaborate detail. Ice sculptures, 7-course meals, a photographer who'd shot celebrity weddings. Nothing was too much for his princess. My mother threw herself into the planning with the enthusiasm of someone living vicariously through her daughter's fairy tale romance. Meanwhile, I tried to be supportive while secretly worrying about how I'd afford the bridesmaid dress and wondering if Lily and I would even fit into this world of luxury and perfection. But Victoria insisted we be part of everything. Despite our different paths in life, she's always been my little sister, and I love her fiercely. I wanted her happiness more than anything, even if her happiness looked nothing like mine. Lily was excited about being the flower girl. She'd practiced walking gracefully down our tiny apartment hallway for weeks, scattering imaginary petals and taking her role very seriously. Victoria had chosen a beautiful lavender dress for her, and Lily felt like a real princess. She adored her Aunt Victoria and was thrilled to be such an important part of her special day. None of us suspected that beneath Marcus's perfect exterior lurked something dark and twisted. None of us imagined that his charm was carefully calculated. His romantic gestures were manipulation tactics, and his love for Victoria was nothing more than an elaborate performance. We didn't know that while we were planning seating charts and tasting cakes, Marcus was living a double life that would destroy not just Victoria's dreams, but potentially her safety, and maybe even her life. The first hint that something wasn't right came 3 days before the wedding, when Lily and I arrived early at the Grandview estate where the ceremony would be held. Marcus was supposed to be handling some last-minute details with the catering staff, but Lily needed to use the bathroom, and I needed to check on the flower arrangements. The estate was mostly empty except for a few vendors setting up, and the silence felt eerie in the vast, ornate halls. That's when Lily heard the phone call that changed everything. A conversation that revealed Marcus wasn't just hiding an affair or financial problems. He was hiding something far more sinister. Something that made my blood run cold, and my protective instincts scream that my sister was in genuine danger. But convincing anyone to listen to an 8-year-old's account of what she'd overheard? That seemed impossible. Especially when everyone was so invested in the perfect fairy tale, when stopping this wedding would mean admitting that we'd all been fooled by a monster in disguise. What happened next would test every relationship in our family, challenge everything we thought we knew about love and trust, and prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Sometimes a child's courage is the only thing standing between evil and its next victim. And sometimes, speaking up means everything falls apart before it can be rebuilt into something real and true and safe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably think I was one of those cautionary tales mothers tell their daughters. At 32, I'm a single mom working 2 jobs, mornings at Millbrook, General Hospital as a medical assistant, and evenings cleaning offices downtown. I drive a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door that I can't afford to fix, and I clip coupons like my grandmother used to do during the Great Depression. But here's what those surface details don't tell you. I'm proud of the life I've built. 6 years ago, when my ex-husband Jake walked out on us because he said fatherhood was cramping his style, I had 2 choices. I could fall apart, or I could figure out how to be everything my daughter needed. I chose to fight. I went back to school for my medical assistant certification while working nights at a diner. I learned to change my own oil, fix leaky faucets, and turn our tiny 2-bedroom apartment into a home filled with love and laughter. The sacrifices I've made aren't small. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years. I drive 40 minutes out of town to shop at discount grocery stores. I've never taken Lily on a real vacation. Our adventures are day trips to free museums and picnics in local parks. But what I lack in money, I make up for in time, attention, and fierce protective love. Lily has never doubted for a single day that she's the most important thing in my world. My daughter Lily is 8 years old, and she's the kind of child who notices everything. She has dark curls that refuse to stay in ponytails, brown eyes that seem to look straight into people's souls, and a smile that can light up the darkest room. She's been reading since she was 4, loves science documentaries, and has an uncanny ability to sense when something isn't right with people. Lily asks questions that make adults uncomfortable. She's the kid who wondered out loud why her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, wore long sleeves even on hot days, and it turned out Mrs. Henderson was hiding bruises from an abusive boyfriend. She's the one who noticed that our elderly neighbor Mr. Chen hadn't picked up his mail in 3 days and insisted we check on him. We found him unconscious from a diabetic episode and probably saved his life. This gift of hers, this ability to see what others miss, comes from a place of genuine caring. But it also means she's witnessed more adult pain and deception than most children her age. It's made her wise beyond her years, but also sometimes anxious in crowds or around people. She can't read properly. To the rest of my family, particularly my mother, Lily and I represent everything they fear about making the wrong choices. My mother, Carmen, is a traditional woman who believes a woman's worth is measured by the stability of her marriage and the size of her husband's paycheck. When Jake left us, she didn't offer support. She offered judgment. She constantly reminds me that if I'd tried harder or been more understanding, my marriage might have survived. My mother has never hidden her disappointment in how my life turned out. She compares me to Victoria constantly, always highlighting how my sister chose better and planned her life properly. At family gatherings, she introduces Victoria as my daughter, the marketing executive who's marrying an architect, and me as my other daughter who's managing on her own. The sting of that casual dismissal never gets easier. Victoria is 3 years younger than me, but we might as well be from different planets. She's elegant where I'm practical, polished where I'm rough around the edges. She has a corner office at Meridian Marketing, drives a BMW, and lives in a downtown loft that could fit my entire apartment 3 times over. She's beautiful in an effortless way, the kind of woman who looks perfect in photos without trying. But Victoria wasn't always my mother's favorite. Growing up, we were close. We shared secrets, defended each other against playground bullies, and stayed up late talking about our dreams. Victoria wanted to travel the world. I wanted to be a nurse and help people. When our father died in a car accident when I was 16 and Victoria was 13, we held each other through the grief while our mother retreated into her own pain. The distance between Victoria and me started when I got pregnant with Lily. Victoria was in college then, focused on her studies and her bright future. When Jake left, she tried to be supportive, but she was building her career and didn't understand why I couldn't just bounce back faster. Over the years, as her success grew and my struggles continued, we began to inhabit different worlds. She's not cruel to me, not intentionally. But she has that particular blindness that comes with privilege. She'll complain about her cleaning lady being unreliable while I'm scrubbing office floors at midnight. She'll mention spending more on a single dinner than I make in a week, not to hurt me, but because she genuinely doesn't think about how those comments land. When Victoria started dating Marcus 2 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved love, success, and happiness. Marcus seemed like everything she could want: successful, charming, devoted to her. He sent flowers to her office weekly, planned elaborate surprise dates, and treated her like a queen. Even I had. To admit, watching them together was like seeing a real-life fairy tale. What I didn't realize was how much I needed Victoria's happiness to be real, not just for her sake, but for mine. In a family where I was seen as the failure, Victoria's success was proof that at least one of us had figured out how to build the life our mother dreamed of. Her wedding wasn't just her triumph. It was supposed to be redemption for our whole family. The stakes of what was about to happen couldn't have been higher. Victoria's happiness, my family's stability, my relationship with my sister, and most importantly, my daughter's trust in my ability to protect the people we love. It was all about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. Marcus Whitmore was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. Tall and broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes and perfectly styled dark hair, he had the polished confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege and success. At 35, he was a partner at Whitmore & Associates, the prestigious architectural firm his grandfather had founded in 1952. The Whitmore name was synonymous with luxury developments across 3 states, and Marcus wore that legacy like an expensive cologne, subtle but unmistakable. When Victoria first brought him to meet our family 18 months ago, I watched my mother transform into someone I barely recognized. Carmen, who had spent years criticizing every choice I'd made, suddenly became giddy as a schoolgirl. She hung on Marcus's every word, laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, and spent weeks after that first dinner telling anyone who would listen about her future son-in-law's accomplishments. He designed that new luxury resort in Aspen. She'd brag to the neighbors. His family owns half the commercial real estate downtown, and he's so charming. He brought me flowers and asked about my garden. Victoria finally found herself a real man, not like some people we know. The dig was always there, floating just beneath her praise for Marcus. I was used to it by then, but it still stung every time. Marcus had a way of making everyone feel special while somehow maintaining his position above them. He'd ask my mother about her roses and actually listen to her 40-minute explanation of soil composition and fertilizer schedules. He'd compliment the waitresses at family dinners and tip generously enough to make them remember him. He even knew how to talk to Lily, getting down to her eye level and asking thoughtful questions about her favorite books. But there was something about the way he interacted with me that always felt calculated. He was never rude, quite the opposite. He was almost aggressively polite, like he was performing the role of the perfect future brother-in-law. He'd ask about my work at the hospital with just the right amount of interest, inquire about Lily's school with appropriate concern, and always offer to help with things he knew I'd never accept. "Rebecca, you shouldn't be driving that old car in winter," he'd say with practiced concern. "I know a guy who could get you a great deal on something safer. Family discount." Or, "Lily's so bright, you should consider sending her to Millbrook Academy." I could make a call, see about scholarship opportunities. The offers sounded generous, but they came with an undertone that made my skin crawl. It was the tone wealthy people use when they're being charitable to the less fortunate. Kind but condescending, helpful but superior. Marcus never let me. Forget that he was the one with power, connections, and money. I was the struggling single mother who should be grateful for his benevolence. Victoria couldn't see it. To her, Marcus was just being kind to her less fortunate sister. She'd glow with pride when he made these offers, squeezing his arm and telling me how lucky she was to have found such a generous man. When I'd politely decline his help, she'd pull me aside later and ask why I was being stubborn. "He's just trying to be nice, Becca," she'd say. "Why won't you let people help you?" How could I explain that his help felt like chains? That accepting anything from Marcus would give him power over me that I'd fought too hard to maintain for myself? Victoria lived in a world where wealthy men's assistance came without strings. I lived in a world where I'd learned that everything had a price, especially kindness from powerful people. The Whitmore family's influence in Millbrook was undeniable. Marcus's mother, Evelyn Whitmore, sat on the boards of 3 major charities and could make or break social standing with a single comment at the country club. His father, Richard, owned the bank where half the town had their mortgages and business loans. When the Whitmores approved of something, or someone, doors opened. When they didn't, those same doors slammed shut with crushing finality. Marcus made sure I understood this dynamic without ever saying it directly. He'd mention casually that his mother was looking for volunteers for the hospital charity auction. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could participate? He'd note that his father was always looking for reliable people to hire for his businesses. Had I ever considered a career change? Every suggestion was wrapped in silk, but the underlying message was clear. Play nice with the Whitmore family, and opportunities might come your way. Cross them, and those opportunities would disappear faster than morning mist. The wedding planning became a showcase of the Whitmore family's power and expectations. No detail was too small for their input, no expense too great for their standards. They'd transformed what should have been Victoria's dream day into a performance designed to demonstrate their family's prominence. The guest list read like a who's who of Millbrook's elite: politicians, business owners, old money families, and carefully selected local celebrities. I watched my sister disappear a little more with each planning session. Victoria, who had always been independent and strong-willed, began deferring to Marcus's opinions on everything from flower arrangements to menu selections. When she mentioned wanting a small, intimate ceremony on the beach, Marcus gently redirected her toward the grand ballroom at Grandview Estate. When she suggested a simple string quartet, he convinced her they needed the full orchestra to properly honor their guests. "We want to give our families and friends the celebration they deserve," he'd say, stroking her hand with practiced affection. "This is about more than just us, sweetheart. This is about bringing our communities together." Evelyn Whitmore had very specific ideas about how a Whitmore bride should present herself. Victoria's original dress choice, elegant but understated, was quietly replaced with something more elaborate, more expensive, more befitting the family's status. The guest favors were upgraded from homemade cookies to crystal ornaments from Tiffany. The photography package expanded to include a videographer, a drone operator, and enough documentation to fill a museum archive. Each change came with reasonable explanations and loving pressure. Marcus and his family weren't demanding. They were enthusiastic. They were investing in Victoria's happiness, creating the wedding of a lifetime, ensuring everything would be perfect for their special day. Victoria began to see their involvement as proof of how much they loved and accepted her into their family. I saw it differently. I watched my sister's personality being slowly erased, replaced with the Whitmore family's vision of what she should be. Victoria stopped calling me to vent about wedding stress. She stopped asking for my opinion on decisions. She started speaking, in phrases that sounded like they belonged to someone else, talking about family traditions and proper ways of doing things that had never mattered to her before. The most chilling moment came 6 weeks before the wedding, during a family dinner at the Whitmore estate. Victoria mentioned wanting to continue working after the honeymoon, and I watched Marcus's expression shift for just a fraction of a second. It was barely perceptible, a tightening around his eyes, a slight tension in his jaw, but it was there. Then the charming smile returned, and he said all the right things about supporting her career and being proud of her ambitions. But I'd seen the truth underneath. Marcus Whitmore was used to getting his way, and he expected his wife to fit into the life he'd planned for her. Victoria's independence wasn't part of that plan, no matter how smoothly he pretended otherwise. That night, as Lily and I drove home from dinner, she was unusually quiet. Finally, she said, "Mom, Mr. Marcus looks at Aunt Victoria the way Tommy Morrison looks at his toy cars." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Like she belongs to him, like she's something he owns." Out of the mouths of babes, my 8-year-old daughter had seen what the rest of us had missed or chosen to ignore. Marcus Whitmore didn't love Victoria. He possessed her. And possession, I was about to learn, was just the beginning of his dark appetites. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned crisp and clear, with October sunlight filtering through amber leaves and casting everything in a golden glow that seemed almost too perfect to be real. The Grandview estate looked like something from a fairy tale. Sprawling gardens filled with late-blooming roses, ivy-covered stone walls, and towering oak trees that had witnessed a century of celebrations and sorrows. Lily and I arrived at the estate at 7 in the morning, 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Victoria had insisted we come early to help with final preparations and spend some quiet sister time before the chaos started. As we pulled up the circular driveway in my dented Honda, I felt the familiar pang of inadequacy that came with entering the Whitmore family's world. The estate stretched across 40 acres of prime Millbrook real estate, with the main house serving as a backdrop for outdoor ceremonies and the converted carriage house hosting indoor receptions. Marcus's family had rented the entire property for 3 days, turning Victoria's wedding into what the local newspaper would later describe as the social event of the decade. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of the Whitmore family's influence and expectations. A team of 20 florists was arranging thousands of white orchids and roses imported from Ecuador. The catering staff from Meridian Manor, the most expensive restaurant in the state, bustled around in crisp white uniforms, setting up stations for the 7-course reception dinner. A crew from Prestigious Events, the wedding planning company that handled celebrities and politicians, directed traffic with military precision. Lily's eyes widened as we walked through the main entrance hall. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and marble statues stood sentinel in alcoves decorated with silk ribbon and more of those perfect orchids. Everything gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that only comes from having enough money to hire people whose sole job is making sure not a single surface shows a fingerprint. Mom, Lily whispered, tugging on my sleeve. This place is bigger than our entire apartment building. She wasn't exaggerating. The main house alone could have housed 50 families comfortably. But it wasn't just the size that intimidated. It was the way everything was designed to remind visitors of their place in the social hierarchy. The oil paintings of long-dead Whitmore ancestors seemed to look down with judgment. The furniture was beautiful but uncomfortable, chosen for appearance rather than human comfort. Even the flowers, despite their beauty, felt cold and formal, like a museum display rather than a celebration of love. We found Victoria in the bridal suite, a converted library on the second floor that had been transformed into a preparation sanctuary. She stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, still in her silk robe, staring out at the gardens where her ceremony would take place in a few hours. Her wedding dress hung nearby, a confection of French lace and hand-sewn pearls that had cost more than I made in 6 months. "Becca!" Victoria's face lit up when she saw us, and for a moment, she looked like my little sister again instead of the polished Whitmore bride she'd become. She hugged me tightly, then swept Lily into her arms and spun her around until my daughter giggled with delight. "Are you ready for the biggest day of your life?" I asked, settling into one of the antique chairs while Lily explored the room with curious eyes. Victoria's smile flickered for just a moment. "I think so. I mean, yes, of course I am. Marcus has planned everything perfectly. His mother has been incredibly helpful with all the details. She trailed off, then shook her head with a laugh that sounded forced. "I'm being silly. Pre-wedding nerves, right?" Before I could ask what she meant, the room filled with people. Evelyn Whitmore swept in with Victoria's 3 bridesmaids, all perfectly groomed women from Marcus's social circle, who I'd met exactly twice before today. Behind them came the hair and makeup team, carrying enough supplies to transform a small army. "Victoria, darling," Evelyn commanded in her cultured voice, "we need to start preparations immediately. The photographer will be here in an hour for pre-ceremony shots, and we can't afford any delays." Evelyn Whitmore was 62 years old and had spent every one of those years perfecting the art of polite dominance. She had silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, wore a dove-gray silk suit that probably cost more than my car, and carried herself with the absolute confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Her smile was warm and her manners impeccable, but her eyes were calculating, always assessing, always judging. She noticed Lily and me with the kind of attention wealthy people pay to furniture. Acknowledged, but not particularly welcomed. "Rebecca, how lovely to see you. Lily, don't you look precious in your flower girl dress? Perhaps you two could wait in the morning room while we handle the bridal preparations. I'm sure you understand we have a very tight schedule." It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn's tone made it clear that our presence was tolerated, but not desired, during the important work of transforming Victoria into a proper Whitmore bride. I felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, but I forced a smile and stood to leave. "Actually," Victoria said, her voice carrying a note of strain, "I'd like Rebecca to stay. She's my sister. I want her here while I get ready." Evelyn's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. But perhaps the little one could wait elsewhere? Children can be so unpredictable during these delicate procedures." The way she said "little one" made it clear that Lily was an inconvenience to be managed, not a beloved family member participating in an important day. I felt my protective instincts flare, but before I could respond, Victoria spoke up again. "Lily stays too. She's my flower girl, and I want her to feel included." It was a small rebellion, but I was proud of my sister for making it. Evelyn's expression showed she wasn't pleased, but she was too well-bred to argue further. Instead, she directed her energy toward controlling everything else in the room with military efficiency. The next 3 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt more like a corporate production than intimate wedding preparations. The hairstylist sculpted Victoria's usually flowing locks into an elaborate updo that required enough hairspray to damage the ozone layer. The makeup artist applied layers of foundation, contouring, and highlighting that transformed my sister's natural beauty into something that looked camera-ready, but somehow less like herself. Throughout the transformation, a steady stream of people flowed in and out of the room. Wedding planners confirmed timing details. The photographer captured every moment of the preparation process. Caterers sought approval for last-minute menu adjustments. Florists delivered the bridal bouquet, a stunning but heavy arrangement of white orchids and roses that looked more like a funeral arrangement than a symbol of joy. Lily sat quietly in a corner chair, taking everything in with those observant eyes of hers. I could see her cataloging details, storing away impressions that she'd share with me later in her unfiltered 8-year-old way. She was particularly fascinated by the way everyone deferred to Evelyn Whitmore, how grown adults sought her approval for the smallest decisions. "Mrs. Whitmore," the florist asked, "should the altar arrangements be moved 6 inches to the left for better symmetry?" "Mrs. Whitmore," the photographer inquired, "would you prefer the family photos before or after the ceremony?" "Mrs. Whitmore," the wedding planner sought confirmation, "has Mr. Marcus approved the final seating arrangements?" It struck me that in all these conversations, no one was asking Victoria what she wanted. She'd become a beautiful doll being dressed up for display, while other people made decisions about her own wedding day. As the morning progressed, I noticed Victoria becoming quieter, more withdrawn. She answered questions when directly addressed, but offered no opinions or preferences of her own. When someone asked if she wanted to eat something before the ceremony, she looked to Evelyn for guidance instead of listening to her own body. The most telling moment came when Victoria's original maid of honor, her college roommate Sarah, arrived late due to a flight delay. Sarah took one look at the formal, controlled atmosphere and made a joke about feeling like she'd walked into a royal wedding instead of her best friend's celebration. "Where's the Victoria I know?" Sarah laughed. "The girl who wanted to elope to Vegas because she thought big weddings were pretentious?" The room fell silent. Evelyn's expression could have frozen water. The bridesmaids, Marcus's carefully chosen representatives, looked scandalized. And Victoria? Victoria looked like she'd been caught in a lie she'd been telling herself for so long she'd almost believed it. "People change," Evelyn said smoothly, her voice carrying a warning. "Victoria has grown into a more sophisticated understanding of what a proper wedding should be." Sarah looked confused, then hurt, then resigned. She didn't make any more jokes after that. Instead, she quietly took her place among the other bridesmaids and followed their lead in fawning over Evelyn's vision of perfection. By 10:30, Victoria was transformed into a Whitmore bride, beautiful, polished, and nearly unrecognizable as the woman who used to steal my French fries and stay up all night talking about changing the world. As we prepared to move downstairs for the pre-ceremony photos, I caught her eye in the mirror. "You look beautiful," I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," she whispered when no one else was listening. Those words would haunt me later, when everything fell apart, and I realized that Victoria hadn't been preparing for her wedding. She'd been preparing for her disappearance. The pre-ceremony photographs took place in the estate's rose garden, where Marcus posed with practiced ease while Victoria smiled on command like a wind-up doll. I stood at the edge of the photo session with the other family members, watching my sister transform into someone I barely recognized. Every gesture was choreographed, every expression carefully managed to project the image of perfect happiness. Marcus looked devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver-gray eyes sparkling with what everyone interpreted as joy, but somehow felt calculated to me. He whispered things in Victoria's ear that made her laugh, but even her laughter sounded hollow, like an echo of genuine emotion rather than the real thing. Beautiful couple, aren't they? Evelyn Whitmore appeared beside me, her voice warm with satisfaction. Marcus has been planning this day for months. Every detail has been carefully considered to ensure perfection. Something about the way she said planning this day struck me as odd. Not, they've been planning, or Victoria and Marcus have been planning, but Marcus specifically, as if this wedding was his project rather than their celebration. Lily tugged on my dress, her small face scrunched with discomfort. "Mom, I need to use the bathroom," she whispered urgently. "Of course, sweetheart." I looked around for someone to ask about the facilities and spotted one of the catering staff arranging champagne glasses on a nearby table. "Excuse me, could you direct us to the restroom?" The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 22, smiled nervously. "There's a family restroom just inside the main house, through the French doors and down the left hallway. But," she glanced around quickly, "the family's been using the upstairs facilities. You might have more privacy up there." I thanked her and took Lily's hand, grateful for the chance to escape the suffocating perfection of the photo session, even briefly. We slipped through the French doors into the cool interior of the main house, where the sounds of the garden party faded to a distant murmur. The main house felt different with most of the guests outside. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floors as we climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with portraits of long-dead Whitmores who seemed to watch our progress with disapproving eyes. We found a bathroom near the family wing, and while Lily took care of her business, I wandered a few steps down the hallway, drawn by the quiet and the chance to collect my thoughts. The morning had been overwhelming, and I needed a moment to process everything I'd witnessed: Victoria's transformation, Evelyn's control, the artificial perfection that seemed to cover something darker underneath. That's when I heard Marcus's voice drifting from what appeared to be his private study, the door slightly ajar. He was speaking on the phone, his tone completely different from the charming, devoted fiancé he'd been performing all morning. This voice was cold, calculating, and filled with a casual cruelty that made my blood freeze. "No, the timeline hasn't changed," Marcus was saying. "After the honeymoon, we'll have complete access to her accounts. The trust fund transfers automatically. Once the marriage is legal and her father already signed the business partnership agreements, she has no idea how much control she's actually handing over." I stopped breathing. Every instinct told me to run, to grab Lily and get as far away as possible, but I couldn't move. I had to hear more. "The insurance policy is the real prize," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone that made my skin crawl. "Double indemnity for accidental death, and with her history of anxiety and depression, a suicide ruling wouldn't be difficult to arrange if necessary. Give it 6 months, maybe a year to make it look authentic. The grieving widower will inherit everything, and no one will question it." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling, my heart hammering so loudly I was afraid he might hear it. Marcus wasn't just marrying Victoria for her money, he was planning to kill her. "The best part is how grateful her family is," Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "The mother practically worships me, and even the sister with the bastard kid stays out of my way. They're so eager to see Victoria married off to someone successful that they'd probably thank me for taking her off their hands." The casual mention of Lily as a bastard kid sent rage flooding through my system, but it was nothing compared to the horror of what I'd just learned. Marcus was a predator who had spent 2 years systematically isolating Victoria, gaining her family's trust, and positioning himself to inherit everything she owned after murdering her. "I have to go," Marcus said into the phone. "Time to play the loving groom for a few more hours. After tonight, the real work begins." I heard movement in the study and realized he was about to end the call. Panic shot through me as I tried to figure out how to get away without being seen. I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, my hands shaking so badly I could barely function. Lily emerged from the bathroom just as I reached her, and I had to fight every instinct not to grab her and run screaming from the house. Instead, I forced myself to smile and speak in a normal voice, even though I felt like my world was crashing down around me. "Ready to go back outside, sweetheart?" She nodded, but her sharp eyes immediately picked up on my distress. "Mom, you look weird. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking about Aunt Victoria's big day." As we walked back toward the staircase, I heard Marcus's study door open fully. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind us in the hallway. My entire body tensed, waiting for him to call out, to demand to know what I'd heard, to realize that his perfect plan had just been exposed. "Rebecca?" His voice was warm and friendly, exactly the tone he used when playing the perfect future brother-in-law. "Everything all right? You look a bit pale." I turned slowly, forcing my expression into something resembling normalcy. Marcus stood in his study doorway, still holding his phone, looking every inch the concerned family member. If I hadn't just heard him casually discussing my sister's murder, I might have been fooled by his performance. "Just pre-wedding nerves," I managed to say. "Big day for everyone." His eyes studied my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a moment, I wondered if he could somehow read the knowledge in my expression, if he knew that I'd overheard, enough to destroy him. But then his charming smile returned, and he stepped back into his study. "Well, we should head back down soon. Don't want to keep the bride waiting." As soon as his door closed, I took Lily's hand and walked as calmly as possible back to the garden, even though every cell in my body screamed at me to run. My mind raced with the horrible implications of what I'd learned. Victoria was walking into a trap disguised as a fairy tale. She was about to marry a man who saw her as nothing more than a financial asset to be liquidated after a respectable mourning period, and I was the only person who knew the truth. The photo session was wrapping up when we returned to the garden. Victoria caught my eye and smiled, that automatic bride smile she'd been wearing all morning. She had no idea that in 3 hours, she would be legally bound to a man who was already planning her death. "Mom," Lily whispered, squeezing my hand tightly. "What's wrong? You're shaking." I looked down at my 8-year-old daughter, this brave, little girl who had always been my compass in difficult situations. How could I explain that I'd just learned her beloved aunt was in mortal danger? How could I tell her that the charming man everyone admired was actually a monster? More importantly, how could I stop this wedding when no one would believe me? Marcus had spent 2 years building his reputation as the perfect man. My mother worshipped him. Victoria was completely under his spell. Even if I told them what I'd heard, it would sound like the desperate accusations of a jealous sister trying to sabotage her siblings' happiness. But as I watched Victoria pose for more pictures, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, I knew I had to try. Even if it destroyed my relationship with my family forever, even if they never forgave me, I couldn't let my sister walk into that church and sign her own death warrant. The only question was how to convince anyone to listen before it was too late. The next hour passed like a nightmare where I was drowning in slow motion, fully aware of what was happening but powerless to stop it. Guests began arriving in expensive cars and designer clothes, all smiles and congratulations, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to witness what amounted to a death sentence disguised as a wedding ceremony. I found myself studying each person who approached Victoria, wondering if any of them would believe me if I told them what I'd overheard. Her college friends from out of state who barely knew Marcus? Her work colleagues who'd only met him at a few company parties? Anyone who might see past his carefully constructed facade? But as I watched the interactions, my heart sank deeper with each conversation. Marcus worked the crowd like a professional, politician, charming every guest with personalized attention and just the right amount of humility about his good fortune in winning Victoria's heart. He remembered details about people's children, asked about their businesses, and made everyone feel special and valued. He's such a catch, I heard Victoria's elderly great-aunt whisper to another relative. Victoria finally found herself a real man who can take care of her properly. Did you see the ring he bought her? Another guest gushed. And this wedding must have cost more than my house. She'll never want for anything. The irony was crushing. Everyone was celebrating Marcus's ability to take care of Victoria, when I knew he was planning to do exactly the opposite. They saw his wealth and generosity as proof of his love, when it was actually evidence of how thoroughly he'd researched her financial worth. I tried to catch Victoria alone 3 different times, but Evelyn Whitmore seemed to have appointed herself as my sister's personal guardian, ensuring that Victoria was never without supervision or company. Every time I approached, Evelyn would materialize with another important person for Victoria to meet, or another detail that required immediate attention. "Rebecca, dear," Evelyn said during my 3rd attempt. Her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes sharp as glass. "Perhaps you could help by managing the gift table. We want to ensure everything is properly recorded for thank you notes." It was busy work designed to keep me away from Victoria, and we both knew it. I forced a smile and accepted the assignment, but inside I was screaming with frustration. How could I warn my sister about Marcus's plan when I couldn't get near her? Lily stayed close to my side throughout the afternoon, and I could see her, absorbing my anxiety like a sponge. Children are sensitive to emotional undercurrents that adults try to hide, and my daughter had always been particularly attuned to danger. She kept looking between me and Marcus with those observant brown eyes, and I knew she was trying to piece together why I'd become so tense after our trip inside the house. "Mom," she whispered during a brief moment when no one was paying attention. "To us? Did something bad happen upstairs?" I knelt down to her eye level, my heart breaking at having to lie to this perceptive little girl who trusted me completely. "I'm just worried about Aunt Victoria, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about big changes." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. How could I explain to an 8-year-old that her beloved aunt was about to marry a man who planned to murder her? How could I burden my child with knowledge that was already threatening to tear me apart? "Is Mr. Marcus a bad man?" Lily asked quietly, her voice so low I almost didn't hear her. The question hit me like a physical blow. My daughter's intuition had been trying to tell us something all along, but we'd dismissed her discomfort as childhood shyness. Now I realized that Lily had been seeing Marcus clearly while the rest of us were blinded by his performance. "What makes you ask that, baby?" She chewed her lower lip, struggling to put her feelings into words. "He smiles too much, and his eyes don't match his smile. Like when Tommy Brennan pretends to be nice, but he's really planning to pull someone's hair." Out of the mouths of babes, my 8-year-old had identified the predatory calculation that I'd missed for 2 years. While I'd been focusing on Marcus's condescending offers of help, Lily had been reading the disconnect between his expressions and his intentions. As 2 o'clock approached, the wedding party began assembling for the ceremony. The string quartet started playing background music while ushers helped guests find their seats in the rows of white chairs arranged on the estate's manicured lawn. The autumn sun cast everything in golden light that should have been beautiful but felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I watched Victoria take her place in the bride's preparation area, a white silk tent that had been erected near the house. She looked stunning in her elaborate gown, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the forced quality of her smile. Even without knowing what I knew, something was wrong with this picture. Marcus stood at the altar with his groomsmen, accepting congratulations and backslaps from his friends. He looked completely relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. Of course he was relaxed. Everything was going according to his plan. In 30 minutes, he would be legally married to a woman worth millions. In less than a year, if his scheme succeeded, he would be a wealthy widower with everyone's sympathy and no one's suspicion. The thought made me physically ill. Rebecca, Sarah, Victoria's maid of honor, appeared beside me looking concerned. Is Victoria okay? She seems really nervous, more than normal pre-wedding jitters. Here was my opening. Sarah had known Victoria since college. She might be the one person who would listen to my concerns. I pulled her aside, my heart pounding with desperate hope. Sarah, I need to tell you something important about Marcus. I overheard him on the phone earlier, and— Oh God, please don't tell me he's having cold feet, Sarah interrupted, her face going pale. Victoria would be devastated. She's been so stressed about everything being perfect. No, it's not cold feet. It's much worse than that. He was talking about Victoria's money, about insurance policies, about Rebecca. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to uncomfortable politeness. I know you've been having a hard time with Victoria's engagement. I get it. She's your little sister, and you want to protect her, but Marcus adores her. You should see them together when they think no one's watching. He treats her like a queen. The dismissal hit me like a slap. Sarah thought I was jealous, that I was trying to sabotage my sister's happiness out of some petty family rivalry. She wasn't going to listen to anything I said about Marcus because she'd already decided I was the problem. Please, just listen. I started, but Sarah was already backing away. I need to get back to Victoria. Big day nerves, you know? Maybe after the honeymoon, when things settle down, you two can work through whatever this is. She walked away, leaving me standing alone, with my terrible knowledge and no one willing to hear it. I felt like I was trapped in one of those dreams where you're screaming warnings but no sound comes out, where danger approaches in slow motion but you're powerless to stop it. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were taking their seats, programs rustling in the autumn breeze. The quartet transitioned into the processional music, and I knew I was running out of time. In 15 minutes, Victoria would walk down that aisle and legally bind herself to a man who was planning to kill her. I had to do something, anything, to stop this from happening. Even if it meant standing up in front of 500 people and sounding like a crazy person. Even if it meant destroying my relationship with my family forever. Victoria's life was worth more than my reputation or my comfort. But as I looked around at the assembled crowd, Marcus's business associates, the Whitmore family friends, local dignitaries who'd known the family for generations, I realized how impossible my situation truly was. These people had invested in the story of Marcus and Victoria's perfect love. They'd dressed up, brought expensive gifts, and traveled from near and far to celebrate this union. They wanted to believe in the fairy tale. Who would they believe? Marcus Whitmore, successful architect from one of Millbrook's most respected families? Or Rebecca Martinez, struggling single mother with a history of making poor choices? The answer was obvious and crushing. Lily tugged on my dress again, her small face creased with worry. Mom, you're crying. I touched my cheek and realized she was right. Tears of frustration and helplessness had started streaming down my face, without my even noticing. I knelt down and pulled my daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to find strength in her presence. Lily, I whispered urgently, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If anything happens during the ceremony, if I have to say something that upsets people, I need you to know that I'm doing it to protect Aunt Victoria. Do you understand? She nodded solemnly, those wise 8-year-old eyes studying my face with complete trust. Are you going to save her from the bad man? I'm going to try, sweetheart. I'm going to try. The processional music swelled, and the ceremony officially began. The bridesmaids glided down the aisle one by one, their silver gowns catching the afternoon sunlight as they took their positions at the altar. Each step of the ceremony felt like a countdown to disaster, like watching a slow-motion car accident that I was powerless to prevent. The guests sat in rapt attention, phones discreetly capturing every moment of what they believed was a perfect love story unfolding before their eyes. Marcus stood at the altar looking every inch the devoted groom, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression radiating joy and anticipation. But now that I knew the truth, I could see what Lily had noticed all along. The calculation behind his smile, the coldness in his eyes that never quite matched his warm expressions. He was an actor playing the role of his life, and everyone in the audience was completely convinced by his performance. The quartet paused, and then the opening notes of the bridal march filled the air. Every guest rose to their feet in unison, turning toward the back of the garden where Victoria would make her entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was it. My last chance to stop this nightmare before it became legally binding. But how? If I stood up and shouted accusations, I would sound like a madwoman. If I tried to approach Victoria as she walked down the aisle, security would probably tackle me to the ground. Marcus had planned this too perfectly, surrounded himself with too many witnesses and supporters. Any disruption I caused would be written off as family drama, jealousy, or mental instability. Then the French doors of the main house opened, and Victoria appeared. She looked absolutely breathtaking, like something from a fairy tale. Her gown flowed behind her in a river of lace and silk, her veil catching the breeze like gossamer threads. The late afternoon sun created a natural spotlight around her as she stood framed in the doorway, one hand resting on our mother's arm. But I knew my sister's face better than anyone, and beneath the professional makeup and radiant smile, I could see the truth. Victoria looked terrified. Not nervous bride terrified, but genuinely, deeply afraid. Her hand trembled slightly on our mother's arm, and her eyes darted around the crowd like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. She knows, I realized with a shock that nearly brought me to my knees. Somehow, some way, Victoria had figured out that something was wrong. Maybe she'd overheard something. Maybe her own intuition had finally broken through Marcus's careful manipulation. Or maybe she'd simply reached that moment of clarity that comes when you're about to make an irreversible decision. Whatever had happened, the woman walking down that aisle wasn't a blissful bride. She was a prisoner being led to her execution. Our eyes met across the garden, and in that instant, I saw a desperate plea in Victoria's gaze. She couldn't stop. This herself. Too many people were watching. Too many expectations were riding on this moment. Too much money and social capital had been invested in this wedding. But she was begging me with her eyes to do something. Anything. To save her from what she now understood was a trap. The realization hit me like lightning. Victoria needed me to be the villain in this story. She needed me to be the jealous sister who caused a scene, the family embarrassment who ruined the perfect wedding, because that was the only way anyone would listen, the only way to create enough chaos to stop the ceremony. I could see the entire scenario playing out in my mind. I would stand up and make wild accusations about Marcus. Everyone would be shocked and appalled. Security would remove me from the premises. Victoria would be devastated by her sister's behavior, and the wedding would have to be postponed while everyone recovered from the drama. It would destroy my reputation forever. My mother would probably never speak to me again. I would become the cautionary tale that family members whispered about for generations, the bitter single mother who couldn't stand to see her sister happy. But Victoria would be alive. The key. Music swelled as Victoria and my mother reached the halfway point down the aisle. I could see Evelyn Whitmore in the front row, her face glowing with satisfaction at the perfect execution of her son's wedding. I could see Marcus's business associates, local politicians, and society figures all watching with approval as their golden boy claimed his prize. My mother looked radiant with pride, finally having a daughter who'd made the right choices, who'd landed the successful husband and the fairy tale ending. She had no idea she was delivering Victoria into the hands of a predator. Lily suddenly grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Mom," she whispered urgently. "Look at Aunt Victoria's face." She scared. My 8-year-old daughter had seen what 500 adults had missed, that the bride walking down the aisle was in genuine distress. Children don't get distracted by beautiful dresses and perfect choreography. They read emotions with devastating accuracy. "I know, sweetheart," I whispered back. "I'm going to help her." How? That was the question, wasn't it? How do you stop a wedding when everyone wants it to continue? How do you save someone who can't save themselves? How do you speak truth to a crowd that's invested in believing a lie? Victoria was 3/4 of the way down the aisle now. In less than 2 minutes, she would reach the altar where Marcus waited with that perfect, predatory smile. The officiant, Reverend Hamilton from the prestigious St. Mark's Episcopal Church, stood ready with his ceremonial book, probably rehearsing. In his mind, the beautiful words about love and commitment that would legally bind my sister to her would-be killer. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that several guests in my row turned to look at me with mild curiosity. Maybe they thought I was adjusting my dress or reaching for a tissue to dab at happy tears. I felt Lily's hand still gripping mine, her small fingers providing the anchor of courage I needed for what came next. Victoria saw me standing, and her step faltered almost imperceptibly. Our mother noticed the hesitation and squeezed Victoria's arm encouragingly, misinterpreting her daughter's terror as normal pre-ceremony nerves. Marcus's expression sharpened slightly as he noticed the disruption in the back rows, but his smile never wavered. This was my moment. In about 10 seconds, Victoria would reach the altar and the ceremony would begin in earnest. Once Reverend Hamilton started speaking, once the formal proceedings commenced, it would be much harder to interrupt without causing an absolute scandal. But maybe a scandal was exactly what we needed. I took a deep breath, squeezed Lily's hand for luck, and prepared to destroy my life to save my sister's. Wait. My voice cut through the garden air like a blade, stopping the music mid-note and freezing every person in attendance. Stop the ceremony. Victoria, don't do this. The effect was immediate and electric. 500 heads turned toward me in shock. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. The quartet's instruments trailed off in discordant confusion. My mother's face went white, then red with mortification. Marcus's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of cold fury before his concerned expression returned, and Victoria stopped walking. Right there in the middle of the aisle, she stopped, turned, and looked at me with a mixture of relief and gratitude that told me everything I needed to know. She'd been praying for this interruption, hoping someone would have the courage to voice what she couldn't say herself. "Rebecca!" My mother's voice carried across the garden, sharp with embarrassment and anger. "What in God's name are you doing?" Reverend Hamilton looked completely bewildered, his ceremonial book hanging open in his hands. The wedding party stood frozen in tableau, unsure whether this was some kind of planned surprise or a genuine crisis. Evelyn Whitmore's face had gone marble hard with rage, her carefully orchestrated perfect day suddenly derailed by the family member she'd tried so hard to marginalize. But I was committed now. There was no going back, no pretending this was a misunderstanding or a joke. I'd crossed the line, and the only way forward was to tell the truth, no matter how impossible it sounded or how much damage it caused. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his voice carrying just the right note of confused concern. "Rebecca, is everything all right? You seem upset." He was good. I had to give him that. Even in this moment of crisis, he was maintaining his role as the caring, worried future brother-in-law. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the predator assessing how much damage I could actually do to his carefully laid plans. Time to find out. "No, everything is not all right," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Victoria, you cannot marry this man. I know what he really is, and I know what he's planning to do to you." The silence that followed my accusation was deafening. 500 people sat frozen in their wedding finery, their faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions from confusion to outrage to morbid fascination. This was clearly not what they'd expected when they'd dressed up for Millbrook's social event of the decade. Marcus recovered first, his face a masterpiece of wounded confusion. "Rebecca, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Victoria and I love each other deeply. If there's something specific that's concerning you, perhaps we could discuss it privately after the ceremony?" His voice carried just the right note of patient reasonableness, the tone of a man trying to handle a family member's embarrassing breakdown with grace and dignity. Several guests nodded approvingly at his measured response, already deciding that I was the problem in this scenario. But I'd come too far to back down now. "No, Marcus. We're discussing this right here, right now, in front of everyone. Because what I overheard in your study this morning concerns all of these people who care about Victoria." I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his perfect facade. His eyes darted briefly toward the main house, calculating how much I could have heard and how much damage it could do. "I don't know what you think you heard," he said carefully. "But perhaps the stress of the day, the emotional intensity—" "You were on the phone," I interrupted, my voice growing stronger as I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "Talking about Victoria's trust fund, about how it transfers automatically after marriage, about the life insurance policy with double indemnity for accidental death." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several guests pulled out their phones, realizing they might be witnessing something newsworthy. My mother looked like she was about to faint, her face cycling through shades of white and red as she struggled to process what was happening. Marcus's expression hardened slightly, but he maintained his reasonable tone. "Rebecca, I think you may have misunderstood a conversation about financial planning. When two people get married, especially when they have substantial assets, there are practical matters to discuss. Insurance, estate planning. You said 6 months, maybe a year to make it look authentic," I continued relentlessly. "You talked about arranging a suicide ruling because of Victoria's history with anxiety and depression. You called yourself the grieving widower who would inherit everything." This time the reaction was immediate and electric. Several women in the audience cried out in shock. Men stood up from their chairs, their faces dark with anger. The bridesmaids looked at each other in confusion and growing horror. Even Evelyn Whitmore had gone pale, her carefully composed mask slipping as she stared at her son. "That's absolutely ridiculous," Marcus snapped, his patience finally cracking. "You're making wild accusations based on what? A conversation. You think you overheard? Do you have any proof of these claims? Any recording? Any witnesses?" He was right, and we both knew it. I had no proof except my word against his, and he'd spent 2 years building his reputation while I'd spent the same time being dismissed as the family failure. But something had shifted in the crowd's energy. The seed of doubt had been planted, and people were starting to look at Marcus with new eyes. Victoria, who had been standing frozen in the middle of the aisle, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the tense silence. "He's been pressuring me to update my will," she said, her words falling like stones into still water. "He said it was romantic, making sure we were each other's beneficiaries. But he insisted I do it before the wedding, not after. He said it would be a beautiful gesture of trust." More gasps from the audience. Marcus whirled toward Victoria, his mask slipping further. "Sweetheart, that's just practical planning." "He also insisted I increase my life insurance," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her courage. "He said successful couples always had substantial coverage to protect each other. But when I suggested he increase his too, he said his family had different arrangements." I could see Marcus's mind racing, trying to figure out how to spin these revelations. But Victoria wasn't finished. "And last week," she said, her voice now carrying clearly across the garden, "I found research on my laptop. Someone had been looking up information about making accidental drowning look like suicide, about how long it takes for anxiety medication to leave your system, about inheritance laws in this state. The crowd erupted. Shouts of anger and disbelief filled the air. Several of Marcus's groomsmen stepped away from him, their faces reflecting shock and disgust. His business associates looked mortified, probably already calculating how this scandal would affect their own reputations. Marcus abandoned all pretense of patience and concern. "You're lying," he snarled at Victoria, his handsome features twisting with rage. "You're making this up because you're having cold feet and you want to blame someone else." "Am I?" Victoria reached into her bouquet and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Because I've been recording our conversations for the past week, ever since I found that research. I was trying to figure out if I was being paranoid, if I was imagining things." She held up the device, and even from where I stood, I could see Marcus's face go completely white. "Would you like me to play the conversation from Tuesday night, where you asked me about the exact terms of my trust fund? Or the one from yesterday, where you suggested I might want to take up swimming again because it would be good for my anxiety?" The bottom fell out of Marcus's world in that moment. I could see him realizing that his perfect plan had been unraveling. For weeks, that Victoria had been gathering evidence while pretending to be the compliant bride he thought he'd created. "You have no idea what you're throwing away," Marcus said, his voice now cold and vicious. "You think you're so smart, so independent, but you're nothing without what I could have given you. You're just another weak, pathetic woman who can't handle real power when it's offered to you." The mask was completely gone now. This was the real Marcus Whitmore, arrogant, cruel, and absolutely convinced of his own superiority. The charming facade that had fooled everyone for 2 years had evaporated, revealing the predator underneath. "I never wanted your power," Victoria said quietly. "I wanted love. Real love, not whatever sick game you've been playing." "Love?" Marcus laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any warmth. "You think love pays for estates like this? You think love builds business empires? I offered you more than any man ever would, and you're throwing it away because your paranoid sister can't stand to see you happy." He turned toward me, his eyes blazing with hatred. "This is all your fault. You poisoned her against me because you can't stand that she found success while you're still scraping by as a single mother with a bastard child." The casual cruelty of calling Lily a bastard sent white-hot rage through my system. But before I could respond, my 8-year-old daughter stepped forward. "You're a liar and a bad man," Lily said clearly, her young voice carrying across the silent garden. "And you're ugly inside where people can't see. My mom saved Aunt Victoria because that's what good people do. They protect the people they love." Her simple, honest words hit harder than any adult accusation could have. This small child had seen through Marcus from the beginning, and now everyone could see why. Out of the mouths of babes came the truth that 500 adults had missed. Marcus looked around wildly, realizing that his perfect plan had collapsed completely. His reputation was destroyed. His carefully cultivated image was in ruins, and he was surrounded by witnesses who now knew exactly what kind of man he really was. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started. I have lawyers. I have connections. I have power. You can't even imagine." "And I have the truth," Victoria replied, "along with recordings, evidence, and 500 witnesses who just heard. You threatened my family." Security guards were already moving toward Marcus, their faces grim. Several of the male guests had positioned themselves to block any escape routes. The police had been called. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. As the authorities arrived and began taking Marcus into custody, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. The nightmare was over. Victoria was safe. The truth had finally come out. But the real healing was just beginning. 2 hours later, the Grandview estate looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Police cars lined the circular driveway, their red and blue lights casting strange shadows across the manicured gardens, where moments before, 500 guests had been celebrating what they thought was a fairy tale romance. Crime scene tape fluttered in the autumn breeze, and investigators moved through the main house collecting evidence from Marcus's study. Marcus himself had been taken away in handcuffs, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his custom tuxedo wrinkled, and his charming mask permanently shattered. The last image the wedding guests had of him was being loaded into the back of a police cruiser, while shouting threats about lawsuits and connections that everyone now realized were just more lies from a man whose entire life had been built on deception. Victoria sat on a stone bench in the rose garden, still wearing her elaborate wedding gown, but looking more like herself than she had in months. The professional makeup was smudged, the perfect hairstyle had come loose, and the designer shoes had been kicked off somewhere along the way. But for the first time since her engagement, she looked peaceful. "I can't believe I almost married him," she said quietly, staring at the recorder in her hands that had saved her life. "For 2 years, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. I thought I'd found my Prince Charming." I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of my sister's presence and marveling at how close we'd come to losing her forever. You couldn't have known. He was good at what he did: manipulation, deception, creating the perfect image. Even I was fooled until I heard that phone call. But Lily wasn't fooled, Victoria said, looking over at my daughter, who was sitting nearby with our mother, both of them looking exhausted but relieved. She saw right through him from the beginning. How does an 8-year-old have better instincts than all of us adults? It was a good question, one that had been haunting me since the truth came out. How had my little girl seen what 500 grown-ups had missed? How had she recognized the predator hiding behind the perfect smile when even his own mother had been convinced of his goodness? "Children see with their hearts," I said finally. "They haven't learned yet to ignore their instincts in favor of social expectations." Lily didn't care that Marcus was wealthy or charming or from a good family. She just knew that something about him felt wrong, and she trusted that feeling. The police detective who'd been leading the investigation approached us, a kind-faced woman in her 50s named Detective Sarah Chen. She'd been incredibly patient with Victoria during the initial questioning, understanding that being almost murdered by your fiancé on your wedding day was probably more trauma than most people experienced in a lifetime. "Ms. Martinez," Detective Chen said, addressing Victoria, "I wanted to let you know that we found substantial evidence in Mr. Whitmore's study and on his computer. The research about drowning, the insurance policy documents, even a detailed timeline for what he was calling the plan. Your recordings were incredibly valuable, but we have enough physical evidence now to pursue multiple felony charges." Victoria nodded numbly. How long do you think he'll be in prison?" "With the evidence we have, and considering the premeditated nature of the planned crime, we're looking at attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and several other charges. He's looking at decades behind bars, minimum. You don't have to worry about him hurting you or anyone else." The relief that washed over Victoria's face was heartbreaking. For weeks, maybe months, she'd been living with the growing suspicion that the man she was supposed to marry was planning to kill her. The psychological torture of that realization, combined with feeling trapped by social expectations and family pressure, must have been unbearable. "How did you figure it out?" I asked her. "When did you start to suspect?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "It started small. Little comments about my medication, suggestions that I try new activities that seemed designed to put me in dangerous situations. The pressure about the will and the insurance felt strange, but I told myself it was just practical planning." She paused, her fingers tightening around the recorder. "But then I started paying attention to how he talked about other people when he thought I wasn't listening. The way he dismissed waitresses, the cruel jokes about his business competitors, the casual cruelty toward anyone he saw as beneath him. I realized he didn't actually respect anyone, including me. So, you started recording him? I started documenting everything. The research I found on my laptop was the final straw. Who looks up information about faking suicide unless they're planning something terrible? But I felt so trapped. Everyone loved him so much, and I was terrified that if I tried to back out, he might decide to accelerate his timeline. The courage it must have taken to gather evidence while living with a potential killer sent chills down my spine. Victoria had been far braver and smarter than any of us had realized, playing a dangerous game to protect herself while waiting for the right moment to escape. Our mother finally approached, her face streaked with tears, and her usually perfect appearance completely disheveled. Carmen had spent the afternoon learning that her judgment had been catastrophically wrong, that the man she'd practically worshipped had been planning to murder her daughter for money. "Victoria, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I pushed you toward him. I was so proud of his success, so happy that you'd found someone suitable. I never listened when you tried to tell me you were having doubts." It was the first time I'd ever heard my mother truly apologize for anything, and it was long overdue. But Victoria's response surprised me. "Mom, you weren't the only one who was fooled. Marcus spent 2 years creating the perfect image, becoming exactly what he thought we all wanted him to be. He studied us, learned our weaknesses, and exploited them. That's not your fault. That's what predators do." My mother turned to me then, her eyes filled with shame and regret. "Rebecca, I owe you the biggest apology of all. You tried to warn us, and I dismissed you. I've spent years treating you like a failure when you're actually the strongest person. I know. You saved your sister's life today, and you did it knowing it might cost you everything." The words I'd been waiting to hear for 6 years finally came, but they felt bittersweet. It had taken my sister nearly being murdered for my mother to recognize my worth, to see past her own prejudices about success and respectability. "We all did what we thought was best with the information we had," I said carefully. "The important thing is that Victoria is safe." Lily, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, finally spoke up. "Are we going to go home now? I'm hungry and this dress is itchy." Her practical 8-year-old priorities made everyone laugh. Real laughter for the first time all day. Detective Chen smiled and said we were free to leave whenever we were ready, that they had everything they needed for now. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the estate, I realized how much had changed in the space of a few hours. The family dynamics that had defined us for years had been completely reshuffled. Victoria was no longer the golden child living the perfect life, and I was no longer the cautionary tale who'd made all the wrong choices. Instead, we were just 2 sisters who loved each other, who had faced a terrible crisis together and emerged stronger. We were a family that had learned the difference between appearances and reality, between what looks successful and what actually matters. "Rebecca," Victoria said as we reached our cars, "I want you to know something, even if you hadn't overheard. That phone call, even if you hadn't had proof, I would have believed you if you'd told me your concerns. I'm sorry it took me so long to trust my own instincts, and I'm sorry you had to risk everything to save me." "You would have figured it out," I assured her. "You were already gathering evidence, already protecting yourself. You're stronger and smarter than anyone gave you credit for, including yourself." As we drove away from the Grandview estate, Lily fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. In the rearview mirror, I could see the crime scene lights still flashing, investigators still working to uncover the full extent of Marcus's deception. But ahead of us was home, our small, imperfect, wonderful life that I'd built through years of hard work and fierce love. A life that wasn't glamorous or impressive by society's standards, but was real and honest and ours. "Mom," Lily mumbled sleepily from the back seat, "are you proud of me for being brave today?" "So proud, baby. You were the bravest person there." "Good," she said with satisfaction. Because speaking up is important, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. My 8-year-old daughter had just summarized the most important lesson any of us could learn. Sometimes the most crucial thing you can do is find your voice and use it, regardless of the consequences. Because the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient, is always worth speaking. And sometimes, it's the only thing that can save the people you love most in the world. That night, as I tucked Lily into her bed in our small apartment, she looked up at me with those wise brown eyes and asked, "Do you think Aunt Victoria will be okay now?" "I think she's going to be better than okay," I told her. "I think she's going to be truly happy for the first time in a long time, because now she knows the difference between someone who wants to control her and someone who actually loves her. Like how you love me. Exactly like how I love you, sweetheart. Real love doesn't try to change you or silence you or make you smaller. Real love celebrates who you are and supports you in becoming who you want to be." As I turned off her bedroom light, I reflected on the day's events and the lessons we'd all learned. Sometimes the people who seem to have everything are actually in the most danger. Sometimes the most successful-looking relationships are built on the most dangerous foundations. And sometimes, it takes the honest eyes of a child to see through the lies that fool all the adults. But most importantly, I'd learned that speaking up, even when your voice shakes, even when you're afraid of the consequences, even when everyone thinks you're wrong, is one of the most powerful things you can do, because your voice might be the only thing standing between someone you love and disaster. And that's a lesson worth sharing with anyone who needs to hear it. Your voice matters. Your instincts matter. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is trust yourself enough to speak the truth, no matter what anyone else thinks. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the times you've stayed silent when you should have spoken up, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Have you ever had to find your courage to protect someone you love? Have you ever trusted your instincts when everyone else thought you were wrong? Share this story with someone who might need to hear that their voice matters, and remember to subscribe for more real stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Because we all need reminders that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love gives them courage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right? On your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.